Oh, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson tonight. You may not remember a whole lot about it, but the second and final presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is actually a fascinating piece of history, and it's well worth re-watching. We actually did it today because we had time off. Now, Trump showed up with a political kill shot. He had proof that Joe Biden had been selling access to the U.S. government to hostile foreign regimes. Trump knew that, and we know it, from the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. But Joe Biden, as you may recall, did not even respond. That's Russian disinformation, he said. And then he went on the offense. Show us your tax returns, Biden demanded. Show us your tax returns. And of course, Trump refused. Biden, by contrast, already set up a website called joebiden.com to showcase his own recent tax returns because he had nothing to hide. Unlike Donald Trump, you could trust Joe Biden. That was the message. Now, why are we telling you this tonight? Why are we dredging up history? Well, we're doing it because 2 years later, the roles have reversed in a bewildering and pretty remarkable and kind of hilarious way. So we now have Donald Trump's tax returns. House Democrats grabbed them. Law and precedent and privacy be damned. Privacy. And they released them to the public because Donald Trump is orange and bad and has no protections under the Bill of Rights. So now that we have Trump's tax returns, what do they show? Well, they show that Donald Trump got a lot poorer once he got into politics. In fact, he may be the only person in Washington you could say that about. Whatever you think of Trump, it turns out he was not in it for the money, hardly. As for Joe Biden, well, you can't say that about Joe Biden. Joe Biden has never had a private sector job. For more than 50 years, he has worked at your expense for the U.S. government. Yet somehow he's gotten rich in the process. How did that happen? How did Joe Biden do that? Well, Joe Biden does not want you to know. So now, and this is the great part, Joe Biden is the one who is hiding his tax returns. JoeBiden.com no longer links to Joe Biden's tax returns for the years 2016 to 2018. As of tonight, those links have been deactivated. If you go there, you will find yourself taken by force to a Democratic Party fundraising website. So, in other words, stop asking questions and give us money. But it does make you wonder what exactly was happening from 2016 to 2018 that Joe Biden might want to hide. Fair question, but no one in the media seems interested in finding the answer. We do know that during that same period, 2016 to 2018, there was a lot of weird accounting going on at Joe Biden's house in Delaware, the same house where yet another cache of classified documents was just found, yet another. In 2018, Hunter Biden was looking to rent property in California. Now, on a background check form as part of his rental application, Hunter Biden claimed that, in fact, he owned the Delaware house that Joe Biden, his dad, says that he owned. So they're both claiming to own the same house. Hunter Biden then also listed the address of that house as his primary residence on his driver's license, an official government document. Now, this is the very same home where Joe Biden has spent a third of his presidency, in addition to his beach house in Rehoboth, without maintaining any visitor logs. Now, this is worth knowing. Now, we don't know this because the New York Times or ABC News dispatched one of its crack reporters who found it. No. We know it because an anonymous Twitter account called @JJTalking found this background check form on Hunter Biden's laptop. Miranda Devine of the New York Post has also done extensive reporting on it. And the document raises quite a few questions, not all of which we can answer, by the way. But the obvious ones include, did Hunter Biden actually buy his father's home in Delaware? Was he making rent payments to live there? Does that amount that he was paying refer to another property? It was a big amount. On the form, Hunter Biden claims he's paying nearly $50,000 a month in housing costs. $50,000 a month. Where'd that money come from? You wouldn't think Hunter Biden would be able to earn that kind of money. Now, at the time, this was pre-laptop, but Hunter Biden had already been thrown out of the U.S. Navy for cocaine use. He'd already abandoned a rental car with a crack pipe inside, along with his ID. He had already left his wife for his sister-in-law. Now, all of this was public information. So how did a disgraced drug addict with no job skills make enough money to make a $50,000 a month payment? Who was paying him? How much were they paying him? And why were they paying him? And by the way, why do classified documents keep appearing in homes that Hunter Biden lived in? Those seem like fair questions. We have a right to ask them. Joe Biden doesn't feel like answering them. Watch.
Mr. President, are you sure there are no more classified documents?
Are you sure there are no more class? Well, he's not sure. He's not sure of anything at this point, including what direction he's walking. But they're not even bothering his staff to answer questions anymore on this topic because every statement they've given so far, including statements carefully crafted by their attorneys, has proven to be completely false. So, for example, on January 12th, which wasn't that long ago, Karine Jean-Pierre, the Oracle, the spokeslady at the White House, assured us that all classified documents in Joe Biden's possession had already been found.
You said that the search has been completed, but is the president confident that there are no additional documents with classified markings that remain in any other additional locations?
Look, I can just refer you to what his team said. The search is complete. He is confident in this process, and I will leave it there.
He's confident in the What? She didn't say there were more documents. They're hiding everything. They're lying about everything. In fact, more documents were just found in Joe Biden's home. Clearly an effort to undermine Joe Biden by his own party and make sure that he doesn't run again. But also an example of breaking the law, because having classified documents in your home is, as we have learned following the Mar-a-Lago raid in August, a felony and a threat to this nation's security. But CNN isn't that concerned. On CNN this weekend, its crack investigators assured us they've already looked into this and everything's fine.
You know, for many Republicans, the argument seems to be that President Biden is both not mentally fit to hold office, and yet he's supposed to be this, in the minds of some Republicans, this criminal mastermind who is holding on to these documents for some nefarious reason. Does that make any sense?
So notice the framing here. CNN is not concerned about what the president of the United States has done or not done, whether he's broken the law or not, what the contents of these classified documents might be. What are these classified documents, by the way? Why don't we know? Can you generally categorize them for us? Are they nuclear secrets? Do they pertain to China, Ukraine? What is this? CNN doesn't want to know. What they want to talk about is criticism from Republicans. It's about Republicans. They're saying Joe Biden's a mastermind and he's senile. Actually, no one's saying that. At best, Joe Biden is living the life he's lived for quite some time, which is as the source of cash for his ne'er-do-well son and his ne'er-do-well brother, who have made a fortune from hostile foreign governments. And again, we're not guessing at that. Hunter Biden already admitted it on TV.
You didn't have any extensive knowledge about natural gas or Ukraine itself, though.
No, but I think that I had as much knowledge as anybody else that was on the board, if not more.
In the list that you gave me of the reasons why you're on that board, you did not list the fact that you were the son of the vice president.
Yeah, no.
What role do you think that played?
I think that it is impossible for me to be on any of the boards that I just mentioned without saying that I'm the son of the vice president of the United States.
That lady's no longer on TV, by the way, for some reason. Maybe the questions were too tough. But in any case, this all of a sudden is looking a lot more complicated and possibly bigger than just a story about classified documents being misplaced at Biden's homes or next to his Corvette. This might be a clue to the vexing question of how Joe Biden, who was a senator for like several lifetimes, was able to have all these huge houses in Delaware over the years. His wife didn't work at Goldman Sachs. She sort of taught at a community college, kind of, Dr. Jill. Not actually a doctor, by the way. So is it possible that Joe Biden's lifestyle was financed by his son and his son's dealings with foreign governments? Apparently he shared a bank account with his son. Keep in mind that when Hunter Biden left his wife and 3 children, they were effectively broke. Could it be that the money was going to Joe Biden, whose home Hunter Biden, quote, owned? We don't know, but these are interesting questions. At the very least, the media have basically conceded the smaller point that Joe Biden was illegally in possession of classified documents. They're admitting that.
The Republicans are going to go nuts about this. How should the White House play it?
Well, I think they should play it just very straight. I mean, these are documents that were found mistakenly in possession.
The reality is that accidents do happen all the time, and the key, so it's not a good reason, but it's a human reason.
It's a lot easier to accidentally take 12 documents as opposed to explaining, how did I get 325 documents? that is more easily explained that, oh, this may have even been accidental.
As sensitive as this information is, almost on a daily basis, somewhere in the U.S. government, classified information is mishandled. They're unfortunately very, very common. Now, that's entirely different from a scenario where you have somebody, obviously, if they're trying to give that to a foreign power.
The former deputy director of the FBI analyzing a news story. What's interesting, if you take 3 steps back, is that, say, 3 months ago, if you'd ask anybody who follows politics, who are the main contenders for the presidency in 2024? Well, of course, they would be Joe Biden, the current president, and Donald Trump, the last president. And those are the same two people who now are under federal investigation for mishandling documents. One of the stupidest charges in our criminal code, and one of the easiest to manipulate for political ends. So who's the winner here? Well, the permanent bureaucracy, who has just decided who can and cannot run for president. Maybe you love Trump, maybe you hate Trump, maybe you love Biden, maybe you hate Biden. But if you're an American voter, you have a right to decide, because it's a democracy. You get to decide who the president is with your votes. Peter Strzok and the creeps at the FBI, the people who never leave D.C., who actually run the government, they don't get to decide. Because that's not democracy. That's something much darker. And yet the two main candidates are now subject to independent counsel investigations. So voters are no longer in charge. The people who actually run the government are in charge. That's interesting. So one outlet that is honestly covering this story, and really has from the beginning, is the New York Post. John Levine is with that newspaper and joins us tonight to break it down. John, thanks so much for coming on. So I'm not sure, I don't know exactly what all this adds up to. Tell us what you think this means.
Well, thank you for having me, Tucker. I would say it's extremely disconcerting, the entire chain of events, because we have to really revisit what Hunter Biden was doing after Joe Biden left the vice presidency. And it was a period where he engaged in some of his most controversial business dealings, particularly with China and a Chinese energy company called CEFC. He was trying to do a deal to sell them natural gas. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer says that's one of the most significant areas his investigation is going to focus on. He says Joe Biden was involved with it. The 10% for the big guy email stems from that period and that deal as well. And now, all of a sudden, up pops these classified documents in Joe Biden's home, and all of a sudden, Hunter Biden was staying here during the same period, 2018, 2019. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And we really need answers.
I mean, look, there's a lot of speculation online about what this $50,000 a month payment was for. Was it for his office? Did he lie on the form? It wasn't really the payment on the house he was making. I mean, I don't think we know the answer to that. But $50,000 a month for anything, much less housing, is a lot. I mean, how much money did he have?
Well, that's the thing. He was making millions of dollars, by his own admission on the hard drive, from foreign oligarchs in China, foreign oligarchs in Ukraine. And you have to ask yourself, well, what interest did these people, who are very close to their respective governments, have with someone like Hunter Biden, who was an active crack addict and alcoholic, who was snorting Parmesan cheese off the floor by his own admission? I ask you, what was the interest? And the interest was no business interest. It was to get access to his father.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that. And I'm not even judging his addictions. I feel sorry for him. But anyone who's known an addict or a drunk, it's very obvious. Like, you don't send them money. I mean,
right.
It's crazy.
And there's another piece I'll say. There's evidence that he was actually in the garage with the Corvette, because Joe Biden appeared on a YouTube show, or at a web series, Jay Leno's Garage, where he was talking about the Corvette. And he said, Hunter Biden and my son, Beau, they helped restore the engine for me. So that puts Hunter in the garage with the documents.
It's beyond belief. John, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, here's a really interesting story. So 5 days ago, last Wednesday, the FAA ordered a ground stop on all air travel in the U.S. That meant that not a single commercial or private aircraft was allowed in the skies over this country. And that's very serious. Hard to overstate the seriousness of that, actually. The only other time this country has imposed a national ground stop was after 9/11, the terror attacks 21 years ago. So it's a huge deal. What happened? Why did the government ground all the planes? So people asked, but initially no one seemed to know. Pete Buttigieg, who runs the transportation department, which oversees the FAA, went on TV to say he was not quite sure. And then over the next several hours, a kind of story emerged. The government system that sends messages to pilots, called NOTAM, had gone down. And then the emergency backup system had also gone down. Now, the FAA claimed it first noticed this on Tuesday night. When the problem could not be fixed, the government issued a ground stop the next morning. That's what Pete Buttigieg said. He described the culprit here as, quote, a damaged database file with no evidence of a cyber attack. So to repeat, said Pete Buttigieg, there was no evidence of a cyber attack. It was just your garden variety software snafu. Some contractor entered the wrong code. No big deal. That's what they said, but it was not a very convincing story if you thought about it. Shutting down all commercial air travel in this country, even for a morning, is a very serious thing to do. U.S. airlines haul close to 750 million people every year. Air travel is essential. It's also potentially dangerous. So for a lot of reasons, it is imperative that our system works perfectly. But one day, our system just shut down for no real reason. Is that what you're telling us? Yes, explained Pete Buttigieg with a straight face. Now, most people seem to think this was fine. We were not entirely convinced. And then the next day, last Thursday, we noticed that virtually the same thing happened in Canada. Well, that was very strange because the U.S. and Canada have separate aviation authorities. They're different countries, and each country uses its own software to route their planes. The systems are not linked to each other. And yet, 24 hours after our country's NOTAM system went down, Canada's NOTAM system went down also. According to the Canadian government, its system, quote, experienced an outage. Really? What are the odds of that? And then we remembered that on New Year's Day, 2 weeks ago, something similar happened in the Philippines. Its air traffic control system also went down. For a time, no aircraft were allowed in Philippine airspace. Thousands of flights over Asia had to be rerouted, which is expensive and dangerous, potentially. Now, this was also, they told us at the time, some sort of minor technical problem that we should not worry about. Calm down. Everything's fine. But is everything fine? Or is it possible that somebody is hacking into aviation systems and holding various governments around the world hostage until they pay a ransom? Well, yes, it's entirely possible. In fact, for example, in the summer of 2020, UCSF Medical School paid more than $1 million in Bitcoin, and they paid it in order to get access to their own computers, which had been frozen by hackers. They were held up for ransom. So what if the same people or similar people just did something very much like that to the FAA, and then to the government in Canada, and also the government of the Philippines? Now, if that were actually happening, the Biden administration would never tell us in a million years. They would lie about it like they lie about everything else. They would have Mayor Pete claim it was a software glitch from a contractor. And they would lie to us because they would not want us to know that they had been so utterly reckless and negligent and distracted by equity concerns that they had allowed some foreign hostile group to take control of our FAA. But the lie could only cover so much because there would be signs of it. Almost all ransoms like this are paid in Bitcoin. So if the U.S. government was buying huge amounts of Bitcoin in order to pay a ransom, Bitcoin prices would surge, of course. So the question is, has that happened? Oh, yes, it has happened. Since the nationwide ground stop last Thursday, the price of Bitcoin has shot up about 20%. Is that a coincidence? We asked Pete Buttigieg to come on the show tonight to let us know. Unfortunately, he did not respond to our request, so we'll keep asking. Well, it's MLK Day. You may have been surprised to see it celebrated in Boston with a very unattractive, in fact, pornographic statue supposedly commemorating Martin Luther King. What is this about exactly, other than the total degradation of America? Well, a member of Coretta Scott King's family is horrified by the statue and joins us next. San Francisco is a uniquely beautiful city, but it has the kind of problems that suggest civilization itself is falling apart. Thousands of people living outside on the sidewalk ODing on drugs. One of the problems that San Francisco doesn't have is not enough racial reparations, but they're trying to solve that problem. Of course, there's now a reparations committee, and after careful deliberation, the reparations committee has just made a big proposal, and Fox's Trace Gallagher has been on the story and has it for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, keep in mind this is not about slavery because California was never a slave state. The San Francisco Reparations Committee says this payout is to help make amends for systematic repression, defined as, quoting, or intentional and unintended harms perpetrated by city policy, which, if you think about it, opens the door to pretty much everything. Now, to be eligible for the $5 million payout, you must be 18, identify as Black or African American for at least 10 years. You can also qualify if you were born in San Francisco between 1940 and 1996. Additionally, you can get the $5 million by being, quote, personally or the direct descendant of someone incarcerated by the failed war on drugs. So if you or a parent was put in prison for, say, dealing drugs from 1971 to roughly 2009, you're eligible. The proposal also would forgive home mortgages, student loans, and credit card debt because, quote, Black households have costlier or riskier debt. San Francisco has 44,000 Black residents. If half of them qualify, that's $100 billion. And that does not include paying off anyone's debt. Where's the money come from? It's unclear because San Francisco has a $728 million deficit. The city can't really look to the state because California has an estimated $25 billion shortfall and might also be on the hook for its own $500 billion reparations plan. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us tonight. Amazing. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Yep.
So reparation schemes like that do raise a pretty interesting question. If you can change your sex just by saying it, why can't you change your race? Both are immutable characteristics that are determined by genetics, not choice. So if you can change one and why not the other, and as long as you're paying people millions of dollars for being a certain race, then who's to say who's of that race? And if you're not going to get right down to Nazi race science and start testing people's genetics, you're going to have to let people decide what race they are. And everybody's going to be the favored race once that's allowed. Is anyone thinking this through? And you're already seeing it, by the way. So it's MLK Day today. And so, of course, this is an opportunity for Joe Biden to show up and pretend that he actually is Black. You didn't know that, but watch this. He is.
And let's lay one thing to rest. I may be a practicing Catholic. I used to go to 7:30 Mass every morning in high school and then in college before I went to the Black church. Not a joke. Andy knows this.
Yeah, he was raised in the Black church. And in fact, he may apply for some of those reparations in San Francisco. Keep an eye out for that. So in Boston, to celebrate MLK Day, they just unveiled a statue of MLK, but it's not really a statue of MLK. It seems to be a statue mocking MLK and his wife, and now it's forever on Boston Common. It has outraged members of Coretta Scott King's family. Understandably, if you've seen the statue, it's pornographic. Seneca Scott is a cousin of Coretta Scott King. He's called this monument a, quote, masturbatory metal homage in a new piece in Compact magazine. Seneca Scott's a union leader and community organizer, founder of Neighbors Together Oakland, and joins us tonight. Mr. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. So what do you tell us about this? I think a lot of people are kind of confused by it. It seems ugly at best, pornographic at worst. What do you think this is about?
You know, I think this is the product of the woke algorithm that has gone awry. It's like the child who, and the emperor who has no clothes, who had to have the nerve to shout out that the emperor was naked before his court were willing to follow in suit. And I think that's what's happened now that, you know, things have gone viral, and it's pretty much the consensus that this statue is a monstrosity and an insult to the family. I would like to say that, first off, it's important to acknowledge that it is Martin Luther King Day, and nothing should detract from his radical vision, Tucker. And he was assassinated by the U.S. government. You've talked about JFK's assassination recently. Yep. This was in the same period. And he was assassinated right when he was escalating from talking about racial bigotry to class and in the war in Vietnam.
I noticed.
And my cousin picked up that mantle and proudly, and I'm a very proud member of the Scott family. So I was rather upset to see that statue, to be honest with you.
Well, you make a good point that no one ever says out loud, but he had shifted to populist economics. I have no idea who killed Martin Luther King, but it's very obvious it was not James Earl Ray acting alone. He had 2 foreign passports. He was escaped from prison. The whole thing is ridiculous. Why is there no interest in that question?
Well, I think that it's a big moment, and there's a lot of pressure when you spend $10 million on something and people are expected to follow in suit. So this is the biggest, what I think is the biggest lesson is we're at a time when Americans, and particularly black Americans, are falling behind in education. We have a lot less money. The price of eggs are $8, $9. These things are affecting us. And then we're mocked by this monstrosity that spends $10 million with the partial use of public funds.
Well, that's exactly right. And the point of it, of course, is to mock and degrade. It's not art. It's a middle finger. Of course it is. Senator Scott, we appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you so much. So, gosh, I mean, it was just like 20 minutes ago that anyone who mentioned there might be a link between the COVID shot, which cured everything, and strokes would be a crackpot who was banned from public conversation. Now the CDC is investigating a potential link. And we'll talk to a trustworthy physician who has looked at the data on this. That's straight ahead. Special edition, Tucker Carlson tonight. We'll be right back. The moment that Pfizer's COVID booster became available, the CDC, which has done a lot of promotion of Pfizer recently, recommended it officially. CDC said the shot was safe and effective, just like they told us the vaccine stops the transmission of COVID. But now, months later, now that a lot of people who raise questions have been banished from public conversation as science deniers, the CDC is admitting that actually the shot could be dangerous. The CDC's real-time data monitoring system has found a potential link between Pfizer's new bivalent COVID booster and strokes in people over the age of 65. We wanted to speak to the most responsible possible source on this story. Marty McCary is that. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and he joins us to assess this news. Doctor, thanks a lot for coming on. So let's turn it over to you. What do you make of this?
Well, we know that out of 550,000 Medicare beneficiaries, 130 of them had a stroke within 3 weeks of the new bivalent vaccine. Now, this is the vaccine where it was authorized without any randomized controlled trial. Now, there was clearly a statistically significant signal over the baseline rate of stroke, or else we would have never been hearing about this for sure. And when there is a statistically significant increase, that triggers a deeper dive. Now, the CDC has tried to quickly downplay it and said, oh, well, we checked it out in other databases like the Medicare database, which is a database of billing codes. It's not designed to look at actual clinical events. So it's not fair to say that we looked at another imprecise database and didn't see it there. And it's not that far of a stretch. If you remember, in September, we had a big study come out that showed that the incidence of complications, severe adverse events, not just lying in bed, was 1 in 800, and the German study said it was 1 in 5,000. Now, I'm not saying pull the vaccine from the market, but we've pulled vaccines for frequencies of adverse events far less common than we're seeing with the COVID vaccine. Rotavirus was pulled for a complication rate of 1 in 10,000, and the swine flu vaccine was pulled for a complication rate of 1 in 100,000. So there's clearly something there. The FDA's own analysis that somebody there co-authored with other researchers found that there was a clear incidence of pulmonary embolism 50% higher than baseline from the COVID vaccine. It's not a big stretch. Now, the FDA, which is supposed to be our top regulatory agency, said, don't release this data to the public because it'll hurt public trust. The way to increase public trust is to be totally honest and transparent and show us the underlying data set. Instead, the CDC has said, look, we ran other statistical tests, and in the other statistical tests, we didn't see the complication play out. But you don't just run statistical test after test until one of them shows that the signal goes away. You actually run the proper statistical test, which is why the underlying data set should be public information.
Well, of course. And I just don't understand how the U.S. government could recommend a medicine that hadn't been subject to a randomized double-blind trial. That's just absolutely crazy to me. But I appreciate you bringing us that news. Dr. Marty McCary of Johns Hopkins, thank you.
Thanks.
So speaking of COVID, Janice Dean had both her in-laws die in a nursing home in New York State thanks to actions by the government of New York that effectively killed them. And when that happened, Janice Dean changed, her life changed, and she decided to call out these people and to bring them to accountability. She's written a book inspired by that experience. It comes out tomorrow. It celebrates people who challenge existing order. It's called I'm the Storm, inspiring people who fight against overwhelming odds. Janice Dean is Fox News' senior meteorologist. She joins us tonight. Janice, thank you so much for coming on. We just talked about this the other night, about the former governor of New York who is responsible, I think pretty directly, for the deaths of many perhaps including your in-laws, and who was fired from his job for something, Al Capone and tax evasion, basically. He was never held to account for what he did. How did watching that affect you?
Well, it still affects me. I see these articles about him resigning in disgrace because I think he was going to be impeached because of sexual harassment. And although that was terrible, and I interviewed some of the women that were abused by him, the biggest risk that he presented in his government was putting sick patients into nursing homes.
Well, exactly.
He effectively, yes, I believe, helped kill thousands of elderly. And why aren't we talking about that, Tucker? You did. You were the first person I went to when I thought there was something wrong, and we broadcasted that on Fox. But the mainstream media were still hailing him, as a pandemic politician, maybe a president one day.
Yes. Well, that's absolutely right. And there was, at least in the short term, no upside to calling this out, as you found out. I mean, you didn't get rich by calling this guy out. But it inspired you, I think, to look at other people who have done similar things, and you wrote a book about it. Just give us an example of the people in this book.
Yeah, well, listen, this is not my comfort zone, going up against a powerful dynasty politician. And I wanted to find other people, just regular, everyday people that decide to go up to something bigger than themselves to make the world a better place. I interviewed an FDNY firefighter whose brother, Ray Pfeiffer, went to D.C. on his dying days to fight for his fellow firefighters and first responders that were dying of 9/11 related illness. That's a story that I cover that, that took almost 20 years to make sure that fellow firefighters and first responders had the health care they deserved, as well as a mom whose daughter died after years and years of opioid abuse, and what she does these days trying to raise awareness and make sure that other parents don't go through the same thing. So these are the type of everyday heroes that really go up against something modern day David and Goliath stories, and I'm so grateful to you and Fox and everyone who has helped me tell my story.
Well, amen. And most people just don't say anything. They're afraid to say anything. And so it's so inspiring to see people who say what they think is true regardless. And really glad you have a collection of those people. Janice Dean, our friend, great to see you tonight.
Thank you, my friend.
So if you ask the average person, when's the first big UFO sighting in this country? Of course, it was 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. But actually, 2 years before, right where the first atomic bomb was being tested, a lot of witnesses said they saw some kind of craft, not from this world, crash with beings inside it, and it got hauled away by the government. That's actually not crazy. In fact, it's so not crazy that now, all these years later, the U.S. government is officially investigating it. We'll have the latest on the special